Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hey y'all, welcome to another brand new episode of Fun and Games Side Quests. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. You may know me as the series producer of Side Quests, as one of the hosts of Fun and Games podcast, also one of the many hosts of many podcasts across CPOV and beyond. I'll talk a little bit more about where you can find all the stuff that I do later in this episode. But I'm really excited today to chat about an indie game that kind of came out of nowhere from me. A brief shout out to friend of this show and other shows, Eric Van Allen, who is over at Destructoid and one of the hosts of Normandy FM, over the summer points out a game called Eastward, which is the game I'm here to talk about today. A game I had not heard of, I was not familiar with, though it's an indie game that had been in development for a while, and the trailer had just dropped for this game. And so in a friend's Discord that I am in with him and a few other folks within the games industry, we watched this trailer together, and I was immediately charmed by the look, sound, and feel that I could surmise through watching the trailer of this game. I was just absolutely excited. It was like Legend of Zelda meets Earthbound based on what I was watching. And so I became very excited about this game. Then September 16th, 2021 rolls around, which is the day the game was released on Nintendo Switch and PC. And I was very excited that this game was out. So I dive in immediately. I picked it up that day or the next day, sometime within that week, and jumped in. Eastward is a game published by Chucklefish and developed by Pixpil. I hadn't really played anything by Chucklefish. They, of course, made Wargroove. And so I'm familiar with them, but I'm not. And then Pixpil, I don't know. I can't recall if this is their first game or not, but they are definitely a more recent indie dev studio as well. Fairly new to the scene. And so there was no legacy to this game. It was literally that trailer that got me hyped, seeing more information about this game, getting me hyped. And having now played and beaten this game, it has become one of my favorite games of this year and of all time. And I want to talk a little bit about here why I love this game. There are a lot of things I want to cover. I think the best place to start, just because it's really easy for me, and by the time you're hearing this, we should have already aired our interview with this incredible human, but the soundtrack was created by the incredible Joel Korlitz. You may know Joel from working on Tumbleseed, from his work on Halo Infinite and sound design and some soundtrack work on Death Stranding. He is an incredible composer, and the soundtrack for this entire game is absolutely awesome and stands out. It's got a ton of tracks. They have things that are really emotional and bright, really dark and spooky. It really is all ambiance, and it's because of this incredible soundtrack. A few tracks off the soundtrack that I really love are, of course, the title track Eastward, the cooking song, the song Glimmer, Home, Tatari, the final boss theme, which is one of the best final boss themes ever made in gaming, Hectic Fry Pan, and of course the theme for the Iron Carbine, and so much more. It's just such a really phenomenal soundtrack. It really sets the stage for a lot of the action and the things that we get to discover. Let's talk a little bit about the plot. I don't want to spoil it, but the game starts. You play, for the most part, as the titular character John, who is a miner in an underground town because the surface world is believed to be uninhabitable. And so you're underground. You also have a surrogate daughter who's not your daughter, that you found in a weird lab underground. Her name is Sam. She is one of the best written children characters I've ever seen in a game. She's optimistic, she's full of energy, she's super smart and super sharp. And anyway, Sam recalls having been on the surface and keeps saying that it's not destroyed, it's not ruined, and it's pushing people to want to go explore it. Due to a series of events, you get exiled from the town along with Sam and discover that the surface is still intact and quite livable, but there's something that's more than meets the eye going on above the surface. And so hijinks and adventure ensue. The narrative is great. It's compelling. It's charming. There are really quirky characters. I think the strength of this game, above and beyond anything else, is the writing and its characters. Like I said, John, Sam, are incredible characters that you control. Sam has some magic abilities that you learn over time. John fights with a frying pan. Like, there's just so much charm to this game. Characters you meet along the way, Alva and Isabel, Lee, and even Solomon. These are all interesting and really well-written characters that help drive this incredible plot forward. Again, though, I don't want to dive too deep into the plot because it is one of the most interesting things about this game. So let's talk a little bit about the graphics and art direction. This has, like I said, compared it to Earthbound earlier, it's got your, could be 16-bit art, but is obviously more advanced than that. Beautiful backgrounds, character designs. It reminds me of the top-down Zeldas of my past that I love. And the combat, which I also want to talk about, is very similar. Like I said earlier, you fight with a frying pan. You also get bombs, a gun, a flamethrower, and some other weapons throughout that you use to solve puzzles. The combat and puzzles feel very Legend of Zelda-like. There is no dodge roll, though, but I find that the combat, for the most part, is pretty easy to grok. There are moments where you can get easily overwhelmed and can die, but I never felt like the game was unfair. The combat isn't super diverse, but it's a means to an end, and I think the story is what really drove this game for me, like I said before, so that being the case with the combat doesn't really bother me. There's also a cooking mechanic in this game that is very reminiscent of Breath of the Wild, where you pick different ingredients and unlock recipes by learning how to cook these things. You can make all sorts of different recipes that give you bonuses, of course, refill your hearts, give you bonus over hearts, like an overshield. Very also similar to Breath of the Wild, they're gold over your already red hearts. Beating certain areas, bosses, and dungeons will give you extra hearts, and then you can find these pieces of pearls that will increase your hearts when you collect all the pieces. Like I said, very influenced clearly by Zelda. The game also has its own RPG within the game called Earthborn, this fantasy series and video game that all the kids in the initial town and even beyond are obsessed with. You can play gacha machines to unlock things akin to amiibos for this in-game game. I love when games have smaller games within them. I didn't spend as much time with Earthborn as I probably should have, but I really loved that there was this little narrative within the game that ends up also, of course, tying into the greater narrative later on, which is really delightful. I feel like I've rambled kind of endlessly, but I think what I'm trying to say is Eastward is one of those games where if you are charmed by old school RPGs, action games of the past, Eastward is really kind of the game for you. I didn't expect to be as into this game as I ended up being. I was excited for it, but it ended up fitting that void of the kinds of games I miss. Within the year that I am recording this, I got a brand new Metroid 2D game that I never thought I would see or ever get to play again. A sequel to one of my favorite Metroid games of all time. And I feel like Eastward is such a spiritual successor to some of my favorite Zelda games that don't get enough love, like The Minish Cap and Link Between Worlds, which are top-down 2D Zeldas, which I really, really do truly cherish. I mean, the Link's Awakening remake was one of my favorite games on Switch the year it came out because I love that style of Zelda game. And this really does pay homage to that, but with really strange worlds, really interesting science fiction story. And it's not just another dreary post-apocalyptic narrative. There is post-apocalypticness, I guess is a word, within it, but it is much more than that. And again, the way these characters are created and developed and the way you get to know these characters are really what makes this game shine. And I only mentioned a handful of characters before. There are tons of side characters, vendors, NPCs that you get to meet and interact with that all have a uniqueness and a charm to them. This really feels like a living, breathing world. The narrative falls short a little bit, I think, in kind of tying things up neatly. But as a fan of Doctor Who and other sci-fi series that don't always give you all the answers, I actually really love that this game ends with some questions and that you then can look forward to hopefully a sequel from Pixpil that will answer more of those questions. But whether we get a sequel to this game or not, I think Eastward is easily one of the best indie games to come out this year and in a long time. It doesn't hit every mark, but I think what they're going for is really wonderful. It has so much life and character to it, and I think is absolutely worth your time. If you are a fan of some classic franchises that I mentioned earlier, especially Zelda and Earthbound, you absolutely owe it to yourself to check out Eastward. It is available, like I said, on the Nintendo Switch and on PC through Steam. Please play this game. Also, the soundtrack is available on Spotify and other platforms, so you should definitely go listen to or buy the soundtrack as well. It is phenomenal, and Joel Corlitz did such incredible work for this. I listen to it constantly when I'm writing and working on editing podcasts, or more accurately, producing podcasts, because when I'm editing, I'm listening to the edit. Anyway, I've rambled enough. I, as I said earlier, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. I'm the producer of this very series. I am also one of the hosts of Fun and Games. I also host a multitude of other podcasts. If you go to djstormageddon.com, you can go find everything that I work on, as well as my merch page, my Ko-fi, all of the best ways to support me. You can also follow me on Twitter. I am DJ_Stormageddon on Twitter. I'm also the same username on TikTok and on Instagram. Pretty much, if you look for DJ_Stormageddon on any social media platform, you will likely find me. Thank you for letting me rant and rave about a game that kind of came out of nowhere and ended up being a favorite of the year. I am really hoping that y'all will give it a shot and that you'll check it out, because, again, this has probably become one of my favorite action RPG action games in a long time. I think you will really love it too if you try it out. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, as always, happy gaming. Hi, I'm Matt, aka Stormageddon, and I'm the host of CPOV Autographs at certainpov.com. It is a bi-weekly interview series where I interview folks from all over the arts, from writers to comedians to magicians to musicians, even actors, historians, podcasters, pretty much anyone who's willing to chat with me for a little bit. If you like interesting conversations with even more interesting people, go to certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, music is life, and life is good.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.